In the vibrant city of Lagos, where the skyline was a breathtaking mix of skyscrapers, glittering lights and luxury, there lived a girl named Zara. Zara wasn't just any girl. She was the princess, the only daughter of one of the wealthiest and most powerful kings in the country. Her father, King Bayo, ruled an empire that spanned across several industries from oil to technology. The royal family's mansion sat on a hill, a grand structure surrounded by lush gardens and an impressive fleet of luxury cars that glittered under the sun. Zara's life was a dream for many. Her wardrobe was filled with designer clothes from the most exclusive brands, every piece crafted to perfection. Her shoes were like treasures, sparkling with diamonds and gold accents. The most luxurious parties and events in the city always had Zara as the guest of honor. No one could deny that she was the star of every gathering, with her flawless beauty and the kind of charm that could captivate an entire room. But Zara, though adored by many, was far from kind. She was known for her arrogance, a quality that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. She had everything she could ever need: money, beauty, and power. But none of it made her appreciate the struggles of those who lived in poverty, the people who worked hard to make ends meet. To Zara, they were invisible, nothing more than a background to her golden world. Zara loved to show off, and her favorite way of doing so was at her father's luxurious restaurant, the Royal Feast. The restaurant was the most expensive in the city, a place where only the wealthiest could dine. It was located in the heart of Lagos, with an incredible view of the city's sparkling skyline. Zara often visited the restaurant not just to enjoy the finest food, but also to remind the people around her that she was above them all. One particular evening, as Zara sat at her usual table enjoying her meal, something happened that would change her life forever. The door to the restaurant opened, and in walked a woman dressed in tattered rags. She was old and frail, her face marked with years of hardship. She moved slowly with a cane in hand, but she had a dignified air about her, as though she carried a great secret within her. Zara, of course, noticed the woman immediately. She wasn't the type to let anything go unnoticed. Her sharp eyes scanned the woman from head to toe, and a smirk appeared on her face. "What is she doing here?" Zara muttered loudly enough for the people around her to hear. "Does she think she can come into my father's restaurant and beg for food? How disgusting." Her words were like daggers, piercing the still air of the restaurant. The other patrons glanced at each other, but no one dared to speak up. They all knew who Zara was, the princess, the daughter of the king. And in a world where wealth was everything, no one was brave enough to challenge her. The woman slowly made her way to the counter where the waiter stood, but before she could speak, Zara stood up from her seat and made her way over to her. With a wicked smile, Zara said, "You should be ashamed of yourself coming in here with those dirty rags. How dare you try to take up space in a place meant for people of class?" The old woman looked at Zara, her eyes filled with sadness, but she didn't say a word. Zara, however, wasn't finished. "I know you're probably starving, but you won't be getting a free meal here. You'll have to leave," Zara snapped, gesturing toward the door. The old woman stood still, looking at Zara for a moment, and then she turned to leave, but not before giving Zara one last, knowing look. Zara watched her walk away, satisfied with herself, convinced that she had just made her point. What Zara didn't know was that this was no ordinary beggar. The woman was Rhoda, a powerful witch sent by the gods to test Zara's humanity. In disguise, Rhoda had seen the cruel princess in action and was about to set in motion a series of events that would bring Zara's perfect world to an end. That night, as Zara returned to her opulent mansion, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. The laughter and music of her last party faded in her mind as she walked through the grand halls of her home. But in the background, something darker was brewing. The gods had seen enough of Zara's arrogance, and they had decided it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The days following Zara's humiliation of the old beggar seemed ordinary, but something had shifted. It was subtle at first, just a tiny crack in the perfect facade of Zara's life. Her father's business empire, which had once been invincible, suddenly faced troubling setbacks. The stock prices of his companies began to drop. New contracts that should have been secured slipped away like sand through fingers. Whispers of financial trouble spread, and even the wealthiest investors in Lagos started pulling back. At first, Zara didn't notice. She was too busy preparing for the next grand event, another lavish party where she would be the center of attention. She continued to live her life of excess, surrounded by her collection of luxury cars, expensive clothes and an endless supply of attention. But then her beauty began to fade. It wasn't just the physical signs of aging. Her once glowing skin became dull, her eyes lost their sparkle and her hair, which had always been perfect, began to thin. Zara didn't understand. She was young, too young for such changes. Yet every mirror she looked into reflected someone unrecognizable, someone who no longer had that magnetic allure she was known for. But the most painful change was the way her friends treated her. At first they made excuses. "It's just a rough patch," they said. But slowly the invitations stopped coming. No one called her to hang out. No one praised her beauty. Slowly, those who once admired her for her wealth and charm began to distance themselves. Zara tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself that they would come around. But as the days passed, it became undeniable. The people who had once adored her now treated her with indifference. One afternoon, as she sat in her mansion staring out of her bedroom window, something strange happened. There was a knock at the door. Not just any knock, the kind that felt heavy with significance. Zara wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in the midst of her personal crisis. She opened the door and, to her shock, there stood the same old beggar from the restaurant. Her tattered clothes had been replaced by a flowing, majestic robe, her frail appearance now radiating power. "Zara," the woman said softly, her voice now clear and strong, "do you recognize me?" Zara's heart raced. She knew she should be afraid, but instead she felt an odd sense of familiarity, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The woman's eyes were deep, ancient eyes that seemed to see through Zara's soul. "You," Zara stammered, "you were the one I humiliated. How are you?" The woman smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I am Rhoda," she said. "And I have come to show you the consequences of your actions." Zara's stomach twisted. She had no idea what was happening, but she felt it. Something dark and powerful hung in the air. "Your arrogance," Rhoda continued, "has poisoned your world. You have lived a life of privilege without understanding the struggles of others. You have caused pain without feeling it because you believed you could get away with anything. But now it is time for you to face the truth. The gods have seen your heart, and they have chosen to make you understand." Zara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny everything, but Rhoda raised a hand to silence her. "I presented you the path to transform your heart," Rhoda said. "But instead you chose to mock me, to belittle me. And now your world will begin to crumble. Your beauty will fade, your wealth will disappear, and your friends will turn their backs on you. Only when you have lost everything will you realize what truly matters." With that, Rhoda turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as suddenly as she had appeared. Zara stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. What did Rhoda mean? Was she just a crazy old woman, or had something truly magical happened? But as Zara turned back into the house, the reality of Rhoda's words began to sink in. She looked around at the grand mansion, the priceless paintings on the walls, the shimmering chandeliers overhead. It all seemed so meaningless now. A life built on arrogance and cruelty, it seemed, was no longer enough to hold her world together. The next morning things started to go wrong in a way that Zara couldn't explain. She awoke to find that her father's business empire was in full crisis mode. Companies that had once been loyal to King Bayo began pulling away, citing questionable financial practices and investments. Employees who had once worshipped the royal family now whispered behind closed doors, criticizing their leadership. Even the guards who stood at the gates of Zara's mansion looked at her with suspicion, as if they had seen through her beauty and wealth and found nothing of value beneath it. Zara tried to fight back. She called her father's associates, demanding explanations, and she ordered her personal assistant to clean up the mess. But no matter how hard she tried, the situation only worsened. With each passing day, more and more of her father's wealth slipped away. It didn't take long for Zara to realize that her life was no longer what it had been. The luxury, the admiration, the perfect world she had built, everything was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her friends who had once crowded her parties, now avoided her calls. Even her own father, who had been her rock, seemed distant, as though he no longer recognized her. Zara was left alone, standing in the middle of the empty mansion, surrounded by her wealth, her clothes, and her memories of a life that no longer existed. It was then that she realized the harsh truth. She had taken everything for granted and now nothing remained but the consequences of her actions. The days that followed Rhoda's visit were filled with turmoil. Zara could feel her once perfect world unraveling faster than she could keep up. Every corner she turned, another piece of her life slipped away. The news of her father's failing businesses spread through the city like wildfire. The name Adebayo had once been synonymous with success, but now it was a shadow of its former glory. Investors who had once lined up to throw money at her father's empire now turned their backs, whispering about the inevitable collapse. At first Zara couldn't believe it. She refused to accept that everything she had known could vanish overnight. Her father, who had always been the king of the city, now looked like a man who had lost his will to fight. His face, once filled with confidence and power, had become haggard and tired. He spent long hours locked in his office, poring over financial documents, unable to find a solution. Zara tried to hold on to the fragments of her old life. She made calls to friends she hadn't spoken to in years, begging for help. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "My family is falling apart. You have to help me." But the phone calls went unanswered. Messages went unread. Slowly, the people who had once been her closest allies, those who had been drawn to her wealth, her beauty, and her social status, disappeared. Zara could feel their distance, their avoidance. It was as though she had become invisible, a person no one wanted to associate with. And it wasn't just her social circle that was abandoning her. Zara's own reflection in the mirror became a cruel reminder of her downfall. The once glistening hair that had always been the envy of everyone around her now looked thin and brittle. Her skin, once flawless, was now dull and marked with the signs of stress and sleepless nights. Her beauty, which had been her most prized possession, had faded away like a dream that no longer mattered. The wealth too was vanishing. The grand mansion, the luxury cars parked in the driveway, the lavish wardrobe, everything was slowly being stripped away. Her father had to sell off parts of his empire just to keep the family afloat. The royal mansion, which had once been a symbol of power and grace, now felt like a prison. Zara couldn't escape the suffocating reality of her own failure. One evening, as Zara sat in the grand sitting room of the mansion, staring out the window at the once thriving city of Lagos, she felt a deep sense of emptiness. It was as if the entire world had turned its back on her. The city's lights, which had once felt like a reflection of her own brilliance, now seemed cold and distant, mocking her. As the hours passed and the mansion grew darker, a quiet knock on the door broke the silence. It was Rhoda again. Zara, though confused and angry, couldn't deny the strange sense of dread that lingered in the air whenever the old woman appeared. "You," Zara said, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me? Haven't you already taken everything?" Rhoda stood in the doorway, her ancient eyes looking at Zara with a mix of pity and understanding. "I came to offer you something," she said softly, her voice low and powerful. "A chance. A chance to redeem yourself. To undo the damage you've done." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "I've lost everything. My father's business is ruined. I have no friends left. My life is falling apart. What could possibly fix that?" Rhoda's expression softened. "You have lost many things, yes. But you have not lost your soul. You still have a chance to change. But only if you're willing to face the truth about who you are." Zara stared at her, confused and frustrated. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. "I don't know how to fix any of this." Rhoda stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Zara's. "The path to redemption lies in humility, not in power. You must learn to live among the people you once despised. The poor, the forgotten, the ones you've hurt. It is only through their suffering that you will understand the true meaning of wealth. And only when you have given up your arrogance, your cruelty, will the gods even consider restoring what you have lost." Zara felt a lump form in her throat. "But I can't." Her voice trailed off, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of helplessness. The reality of her situation hit her harder than any loss she had experienced before. How could she live among the people she had looked down on her entire life? How could she face those she had humiliated, the beggars, the servants, the poor? Rhoda seemed to read her thoughts. "The journey will not be easy. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. But if you truly want to change, if you truly want to redeem yourself, then you must walk this path." Zara swallowed hard, the weight of Rhoda's words pressing down on her. There was a deep part of her that wanted to refuse. It felt impossible, humiliating even, to lower herself to such a level. But another part of her, the part that had once been carefree and full of life, now longed for something more. Something real. "What do I have to do?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhoda smiled, a faint knowing smile. "You will leave this mansion behind. You will step into the world you once ignored and you will learn from it. Only then will you truly understand what it means to be wealthy." With those final words, Rhoda turned and left, leaving Zara standing alone in the darkened mansion. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest, but deep inside she knew it was the only way forward. The only way to undo the damage she had caused, to reclaim her humanity. The next morning, Zara stood at the threshold of her mansion, gazing at the world outside with a mixture of fear and resolve. She was no longer the princess of Lagos, the glittering jewel everyone admired. Today she was just Zara. No title, no wealth, and no luxury. Rhoda's words echoed in her mind. "You must live among the people you once despised." Zara took a deep breath, the air in the city now feeling foreign to her. The once bustling streets of Lagos, where she had driven her expensive cars without a second thought, now seemed alive with a different kind of energy. The noise, the traffic, the people, it was all so overwhelming, and for the first time Zara felt small. She had no idea where to start. Rhoda hadn't given her any specific instructions, just the vague promise of redemption. What did it even mean to learn from the poor? How could she, someone who had always lived in luxury, begin to understand their struggles? After a long walk through the city, Zara found herself standing in front of a small street market. The colors of the stalls, the smell of food, and the hustle of vendors all around her felt like a world she had never truly seen before. She stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or turn back to the comfort of her mansion. But then she remembered Rhoda's words, and with a mix of fear and determination she stepped into the market. The people didn't seem to notice her at first. They were too busy going about their daily lives, selling goods, haggling for prices, and chatting with one another. But Zara felt like an intruder in their world. She had never been this close to people who lived in poverty, people who worked hard for every naira they earned. She realized as she looked at their faces that they were nothing like the people she had known in her life of privilege. They weren't begging for handouts, they weren't whining about their situations. They were simply surviving, pushing through their struggles with strength and dignity. At first, Zara tried to stay unnoticed, lurking in the corners of the market, watching them from a distance. But it wasn't long before she saw an elderly woman selling fruits at a stall. The woman's hands were worn and rough from years of hard work, her face lined with wrinkles. Zara stood there for a while, watching her, before something inside her shifted. "Excuse me," Zara said, her voice trembling as she approached the woman. "How much for the mangoes?" The old woman looked up, her eyes wary at first, before she gave Zara a small smile. 100 naira, my daughter. Are you sure you want just one?" Zara nodded, digging into the pocket of her faded jeans. A pair of jeans she had borrowed from a local thrift store earlier that morning. She handed over the money and took the mango in her hand. It was rough around the edges, but she could see the beauty of it. The simple, humble nature of it felt strangely comforting. As Zara turned to leave, the old woman called out to her. "Come back anytime, my daughter. There's always room for more in this world, no matter who you are or where you come from." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected kindness. She had expected judgment, perhaps even scorn, but this woman's words struck something deep within her. Could it really be that simple? Could kindness from the people she had once ignored change her? As the days went by, Zara began to immerse herself in the lives of the people around her. She volunteered at food kitchens, working side by side with others who had known nothing but hardship. She helped clean up the local streets, picking up trash and doing whatever she could to be a part of something bigger than herself. She worked with children at the community center, teaching them the value of kindness and education, two things she had once taken for granted. It wasn't easy. Every time Zara faced the people she had once looked down upon, she felt the weight of her past actions. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when the pain of her own guilt was too much to bear. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered Rhoda's warning. The gods will only restore your fortune when you have truly learned humility. The hardest part was the emotional struggle. Zara had never truly connected with anyone on a deep level before. Most of her relationships had been shallow, based on what others could do for her or how they could make her feel important. Now in this new world she had to learn to give without expecting anything in return. She had to open her heart to people who had nothing to offer but themselves. There was one moment that stood out to Zara more than anything else. She was at a small village outside the city, helping to distribute food and supplies to families in need. The children there were laughing and playing despite their difficult circumstances. They had so little but they seemed so full of joy. Zara watched them for a while and for the first time in years she felt something stir inside her. A warmth, a deep sense of connection. Later that day as she sat with a group of women talking about life and its challenges, one of them said something that struck Zara to her core. You know, the woman said, life is not about what we have or don't have. It's about how we live with what we've got. It's about the people around us, the love we share. That's the real wealth. Zara sat in silence, letting the words sink in. It was a truth she had never understood until now. She had spent her whole life chasing after things, thinking that wealth and status would bring her happiness. But now she realized that true wealth wasn't about money or possessions. It was about the relationships we build and the kindness we give. And in that moment, Zara knew that she was no longer the person she had once been. She had changed. She was no longer the cruel, arrogant princess. She was someone new. Someone who understood the value of compassion, of humility, of giving. The days that followed were some of the most challenging and rewarding of Zara's life. She had completely immersed herself in the world she had once ignored. With each passing day she learned something new, not about the world but about herself. The more she gave, the more she received in return. She found joy in small things, in moments of connection and in acts of kindness. It was a simple life, but it was a life filled with meaning. As Zara spent more time with the people she had once looked down upon, she began to realize how much she had taken for granted. She had lived her life surrounded by luxury, but none of that had ever brought her the kind of fulfillment that she now found in helping others. She didn't miss the high society parties or the glamorous gatherings. Instead, she found peace in the laughter of children, the quiet conversations with elders, and the shared work with fellow volunteers. But as the weeks passed, Zara's transformation did not go unnoticed. Word of her newfound humility and her dedication to the people spread throughout the city. People who had once seen her as nothing more than a spoiled princess began to take note. And though some were skeptical at first, most of them recognized the genuine change in her heart. One evening, as Zara was walking home from the community center, she passed by the same street market where she had bought the mango from the old woman. This time, however, things felt different. The vendors smiled at her as she walked by, and a few even waved. Zara smiled back, grateful for their kindness, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel like an outsider. As she continued down the street, she saw a familiar face in the distance. It was Rhoda. The old woman was standing under the flickering streetlight, watching Zara with a knowing expression. For a moment, Zara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen Rhoda in weeks, not since that fateful day when she had been given the chance to change. Zara approached the woman slowly. "Rhoda," she said softly. "I don't know if I can ever fully repay you for what you've done. You were right about everything. I had to lose everything to understand what really matters." Rhoda smiled, a warm, almost proud smile. "I knew you had it in you, Zara. You just needed to see the truth. You needed to open your heart to the world you had closed yourself off from." Zara nodded, her voice full of emotion. "I never realized how much I was missing. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing. Now I see what true wealth is. It's not about money or possessions. It's about kindness, love, and giving." Rhoda's eyes twinkled with approval. "You have learned the most important lesson, Zara. And for that, the gods will restore what you have lost. But remember, true wealth is never about what you receive. It's about what you give." Zara smiled, a deep, sincere smile. "I understand now. And I promise you I will never forget." Rhoda gave her a final knowing look before she began to fade into the shadows, as mysteriously as she had appeared. Zara watched her disappear, feeling a sense of peace that she had never known before. A few weeks later, as the financial troubles that had plagued her father's empire began to ease, Zara's life took an unexpected turn. Her family's fortune, though never fully restored to its former glory, began to recover. But more importantly, it was Zara who had changed. She no longer cared about the wealth or status that had once defined her. She had found something far more valuable, her humanity. Zara used her father's remaining resources to help the people she had once ignored. She established foundations to provide for the poor, to give children access to education, and to support local businesses. No longer content to be a passive recipient of luxury, Zara had become a force for good, using her position of privilege to uplift others. The people who had once looked at her with disdain now saw her in a new light. She was no longer the spoiled princess, but a compassionate leader who had learned the true meaning of wealth. Zara had become a symbol of redemption, proof that even the most arrogant, selfish hearts could change. As time went on, the memories of her former life, her arrogance, her cruelty, her indifference to the suffering of others, faded into the past. They were no longer who she was. The gods had seen her transformation, and they had rewarded her with a new kind of wealth, a wealth that could not be measured in money or material possessions. Zara had discovered that the greatest gift of all was the ability to love and to give, to put others before herself and to share the blessings she had once taken for granted. She had learned that true wealth was not something to be hoarded or flaunted. It was something to be shared with those who needed it most. And so, Zara's life became a testament to the power of redemption, to the idea that no matter how far someone may fall, they can always rise again. She had gone from being a princess who thought she had everything, to a woman who understood the true meaning of wealth. The city of Lagos, once a place where Zara's name was spoken with envy and admiration, now spoke of her with respect. She had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the most broken of people can find their way back to the light. And as the years went by, Zara never forgot the lessons she had learned on her journey. She continued to serve the people, to share her wealth, and to be the leader they needed. But most of all, she remained humble, remembering always that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in what we give.